The DevOps in one slide. Really, I wanted to explain a little bit about the sort of the standard flow that DevOps follows and the key reasons that people do DevOps, because this will act as a context for how we've approached DataOps. So in essence, DevOps is development operations. The team that sits in the left-hand part of this infinity sign is the development team. So they plan work, they create work, they verify, or more usually called test work, they package, or often called deploy work, and then that goes into production. And then the operation cycle is how you release that, how you operate it or configure it in operation, how you monitor it, which is very critical. And then there is a feedback loop here. The idea is that you're constantly monitoring, and monitoring can be a physical monitoring system, but it could also be monitoring of how users are using it. If you're an e-commerce application, your monitoring might include what's our conversion rate. We might be doing A/B testing with 2 different versions of a website and want to find out which checkout process is better, that people are completing more. And then the key part of this is a feedback loop. So you're always feeding back between what you're observing of the system you're using and the development you're doing for your next iteration. And there's a good argument to say, well, hang on, we've been doing, we did that 20 years ago. 20 years ago, we looked at our current system and we learned some lessons from it, and then we made some changes. The key difference really with DevOps is the frequency of these cycles. I would be expecting in any meaningful company doing this, certainly in the worlds where it's done traditionally, sort of web development in those areas, that left-hand development cycle is measured in hours, at most days. You're expecting to take a piece of work, decompose to a certain level, plan it, do it, test it, and package it to the level where it could be released every few hours, certainly every few days. You'll also hear the term CI/CD, continuous integration, continuous deployment. Continuous integration is effectively this left side. I'm constantly building new things in very small atomic blocks, and I'm testing them with everything else. That's the continuous integration piece. The continuous deployment piece is the right-hand circle, which is I'm constantly or very frequently pushing out the stuff I've tested into production. And this is where there's actually a lot more variety across organizations. If you look at someone, I think I read a stat the other day that Netflix do 70,000 deployments into production a week or something like that. It's that order of magnitude. Basically, when a piece of code has been developed and tested and passed all the ultimate test suites, it's pushed into production there and then. There's no maintenance windows, there's no human involvement, there's no stakeholder saying, yes, I'm ready for it to go. Once it gets into the master branch, it's released into production instantly. A lot of organizations in the software world are not ready for that yet. They still package up and do a weekly release, for example. And certainly in the data world, I don't think there's any organizations that are ready for true continuous deployment. But the basic principles are in the left-hand circle, we should be able to iterate in hours, at worst days. The right-hand circle is really a business decision as to how mature we are and how ready we are. Maybe we move from monthly deployment to weekly deployment. Maybe we choose we could do 2 or 3 deployments a week. At some point, data organizations will get to the point where they are happy with continuous deployment, but it's absolutely not a short-term goal. In terms of why do people do DevOps, as I said, a lot of it revolves around development cycles. If I can get things out in a day as opposed to a month, that has very obvious positive impacts for the business. And the impacts are twofold. First of all, if it takes a day to do it, it's cost less as opposed to taking a month to do it. But almost more importantly for a lot of organizations is the time to value. It's not the fact that it costs me a day's worth of development, not 4 weeks worth of development. It's the fact that the business got access to that after a day and didn't have to wait a month. Usually when we talk to customers, that opportunity cost of getting it to market fast is actually more valuable than the number of hours or days saved in building it, but they're both important. Reduced deployment failures, rollbacks, and time to recover. This entire DevOps process only works if you have everything fully automated. And we'll cover this at length in a minute as it applies to data. But if you think about this as from a web application perspective, when Netflix or Amazon or eBay or whoever have a new version to deploy, they don't go onto their existing web servers and say, right, I've got a new JavaScript file here or a new HTML file there. That doesn't happen. The deployment process is I've built a new web server image and I'm going to choose to deploy 1, 2, 5, 100 of them. There really is no concept of an upgrade in place. I'm constantly redeploying the entire new web infrastructure. What that means is it's very robust because I'm constantly doing the same thing again and again. It's very robust for rollbacks because if it breaks, I don't have to worry about, gosh, which files do I have to roll back? Did I back those files up? I simply say build 14,000 was no good. I'm going to just push build 13,999, which also impacts time to recovery. You don't have to think about it. The process for saying this was no good, bother, I need to go back to the previous one, should be in the click of a button. Communication and collaboration. Once you start getting, particularly in the development cycle, once you start getting into Git processes and branching and things like that, the ability for lots of people to work on lots of different things without stepping on each other's toes increases exponentially. We were finishing a pilot with a customer a couple of weeks ago, and I did a measurement at the end of the day, and we had 4 engineers working on it concurrently. We had something like 200 commits. That was 200 effectively iterations through that development loop, and we had 47 pushes to production. So 4 people, 200 times around the left-hand loop, and best part of 50 iterations through the right-hand loop in a single day. And we were doing that with 4 people working on different things, constantly not stepping on each other's toes, just because of the way all of the change control and configuration management happens. Increased efficiency is talking about once you start getting into automation, particularly once you start talking about things like automated testing, the efficiency improvements are massive. And that typically leads on to number 5, as a baseline across IT organizations and web development, things like that, people are looking at about a 30% reduction in cost as they start to adopt DevOps. The term adopting is important. DevOps is a philosophy, not a tool. DevOps is a way of doing business and thinking about the world. Of course, there are tools that support DevOps. Without the right tooling, any sort of reasonable process of DevOps would be impossible. But an organization that says, hey, I want to buy a tool because I want to do DevOps is sort of missing the point and will almost certainly fail. An organization says, I want to adopt DevOps principles and understand what that means, and I'd like the tools that support that. That's a very reasonable request. That organization is very likely to be successful.